The boy possesses the ultimate swordsmanship, which surpasses even thunder, but because he lacks magical talent, he is subjected to ridicule by his classmates. Even his teacher wishes he could expel him immediately, as in this world dominated by magic, he can't use any magical skills other than his sword techniques. In this place, magic is power. As a result, to avoid expulsion, Will has to defeat monsters in the dungeon every day and use the credits earned to maintain his grades. However, his frequent visits to the dungeon unexpectedly honed his superhuman reflexes and photographic memory. Today, the teacher prepared to have Will, who lacks magical abilities, perform a magic spell. He was simply supposed to pick up the catalyst in front of him to control the flames. Facing such a straightforward practical exercise, Will could only hold his wand in silence. The laughter continued for a moment until the teacher asked the students to stop. Everyone thought he was going to comfort Will, but surprisingly, the teacher mocked Will, calling him a bookworm. At that moment, a classmate used a wand to successfully ignite the catalyst in front of Will with a fire spell, meeting the teacher's expectations. The teacher hoped Will would choose to drop out on his own. This has been a regular occurrence in Will's life. He couldn't remember how many times the teacher had put him in such difficult situations. Sion, who had acted earlier, also made it a point to trouble Will daily. Despite this, Will did not become despondent. Among his classmates, there were those who considered him a friend. Colette, a girl of noble lineage, did not see Will as useless. Instead, she secretly harbored feelings for him. This led to Will, who was oblivious to her feelings, often sharing stories about childhood friends. Once, invaders threatened humanity from above this world. But fortunately, 5 magicians emerged to save mankind. After their heroic deeds, they were granted the highest honor of the 5 supreme battles. Elfaria, who grew up with Will, became the youngest ever among the 5 supreme battles in less than 10 years. Thus, Will continued his pursuit to follow in Elfaria's footsteps, despite not having magical abilities. He still vividly remembers their promise to fight side by side. Today, his unauthorized entry into the dungeon was discovered by another teacher. Warkner, upon learning that Will had bypassed the first level and directly ventured into the 7th level of the dungeon, thought Will was insane, considering the strength of the monsters there. But this was also what Will did to avoid being expelled, as he needed to defeat higher-level monsters to earn more credits. Witnessing this, Warkner seemed to remind him that it was impossible to graduate merely on credits, especially since Will was a muggle who knew no magic. However, upon hearing this, Will did not plan to give up, because the only thing he could do now was to keep killing monsters. Seeing Will's determination, Warkner gave him a tip. According to Will's current grades, he needed to earn 4 credits this week to avoid expulsion. Will was shocked. Today was Friday, which meant he only had 2 days left until the next test. He immediately started to check his books for any monsters worth 4 credits, remembering that the teacher had mentioned it last month. Seeing Will so anxious, Warkner then told him about a monster named Baskerville on the 6th level of the dungeon, which was worth exactly 4 credits. This news made Will ecstatic. He joyfully hugged his teacher, unaware that outside the door, someone had just overheard their conversation. This person was Sion, who also planned to go to the 6th level to eliminate Will, whom he saw as a pest to the school. Thus, an unknowing Will arrived here, slightly excited because he had previously fought Baskerville on the 6th level. Although he had not defeated it then, the experienced Will knew that as long as he avoided Baskerville's flames, he was completely confident he could win this time. Meanwhile, Sion entered with 3 lackeys, not planning to attack Will directly. By defeating the monster before Will could, Sion hoped to prevent Will from earning the credits, thus leading to his expulsion. However, the other 2, who had never ventured beyond the 1st level of the dungeon, were not confident about this plan. Nonetheless, as an elite of the academy, Sion ignored their concerns. But just as they were talking, a sandbag-sized fist appeared out of nowhere. The commotion quickly caught Will's attention nearby. When Will arrived and saw what was happening, he was stunned. The monster in front of them was not Baskerville, but the evil spirit sentinel from the 10th level, a creature worth 10 credits. Such a formidable opponent should not have appeared on this level. Considering there might be an issue with the dungeon, Will also saw a man battling the evil spirit sentinel. Sion, in panic, used his flame magic to attack, but it caused no damage. Now, Will faced a dilemma. He wanted to intervene, but Scion had always mocked him. But if he didn't intervene, Scion might just die. However, in that moment of indecision, Will remembered what his childhood friend Alfaria had once told him. She had said he was brave and had even given him a pair of glasses. Wearing these glasses symbolized Will's resolve. At that moment, Will, like a longsword, managed to block the attack of the evil spirit sentinel. Meanwhile, the teacher found Workner. It turned out that when he learned that his good student Scion had gone to the 6th level of the labyrinth with 2 novices, he immediately suspected it might have something to do with Will. Yet, Workner reassured Eduardo that there was no need to worry if it was the 6th level, because Will was there too. He then used a magic sphere to show the battle taking place on the 6th level. There, Will was seen fighting the evil spirit sentinel single-handedly. In the next moment, Will managed to chop off a finger of the sentinel. Nobody expected that Will could hold his own against the foe. Scion, at the scene, couldn't understand how Will, a so-called magicless nobody, could force the mighty sentinel to retreat. Even Eduardo, the teacher, was taken aback. He couldn't believe that Will, whom he once mocked, now possessed combat capabilities surpassing that of a magician. Seeing Eduardo's expression, Workner unusually commented that he had recognized Will's talent all along. Will's unnatural strength, akin to that of a dwarf, his resilience, and his ability to understand an enemy's movements after just one look, showed that Will was a true genius in swordsmanship. Indeed, he could not use magic, but he was the only warrior in this magical world. Then, with a swing of his great sword, Will's sword energy amazed Scion. As the evil spirit sentinel launched a death ray, Will managed to slay it with a single strike. The battle ended there. Will approached Scion and extended his hand, asking if he was hurt. At that moment, Scion went mad. On the other side, Eduardo, watching through the crystal ball, furiously questioned Workner. He couldn't accept that someone who did not possess magic could surpass those who did. The next day, Workner saw that Will had recklessly challenged a more powerful monster, and unusually, he did not become angry. He acknowledged that this young man would be the one to upheave the world. The man never expected that he, being the closest to a godlike figure, would one day be defeated by a student he had always looked down upon. In this world where magic reigned supreme, the student possessed no talent for casting spells. Yet, he was able to surpass magic with his demon-slaying sword. Because of this, he was treated coldly by his teacher. To Eduardo, the magic teacher, the academy had no place for such an anomaly. So he approached the principal to have Will expelled. However, the principal only presented Will's academic record. Apart from his inability to perform magic, Will was a genius. His grades were excellent in all subjects. Even if he couldn't become one of the Supreme 5 staves, he could be trained towards becoming a sage. Despite this, Eduardo remained stubborn. The principal then suggested Eduardo personally test Will. If Will failed the test, Eduardo could decide his fate, hoping he would see the situation clearly. The principal had recognized Will's talent in swordsmanship 5 years earlier. Although Will appeared frail, he became incredibly resilient when he wielded a sword. This was why the principal had admitted him to the academy. While Will had earned 10 credits, he still had a long way to go to reach the summit and become one of the Supreme 5 staves. To advance to the upper academy, students could either create new magic or earn 7,200 credits. For most, the latter was the preferable option. However, these students were struggling even to graduate. Will's only flaw was his inability to score in magical subjects. To graduate smoothly, he worked harder than anyone else in other subjects. Because he lacked any magical ability, he needed help from a blonde-haired friend, even to open his locker. While studying together, Eduardo approached them. He took Will alone to the arena, displeased with Will's continual failures in magical subjects. He decided to give Will a chance. If Will could land a hit on him, he would earn 5 credits in the subject. Otherwise, he would have to leave the academy. Will had no choice. Meanwhile, Workner was called to the principal's office. It was he who had advocated for keeping Will, so the principal felt it was only fair to consider Eduardo's perspective. Now they would see if Will deserved to pursue the goal of becoming one of the Supreme 5 staves. However, Workner thought the contest was unfair, as Eduardo was the man closest to becoming one of the Supreme 5 staves. Although he had failed in the final selection, He was once a reacher who had nearly reached the summit. Facing his teacher's attack, Will dared not let his guard down. Even attacks from behind were successfully intercepted by the teacher. The next second, Will realized that all of Eduardo's magic could be cast without chance, and that his offense and defense were flawless. It seemed almost impossible to hurt him. Surprisingly to Will, Eduardo could generate multiple instances of a single basic spell at once. Even though Will had honed his physical skills to the extreme, he couldn't dodge the barrage of attacks. Eduardo elegantly reveled in the pleasure brought by his magic, making Will struggle to defend himself. Meanwhile, the blonde-haired friend anxiously awaited Will. Teacher Eduardo, known for never going easy on students, watched as a magic pet, covered in wounds, walked in. Pointing at the locker in front, the blonde quickly guessed its intention. By then, Will had already collapsed on the ground. Eduardo stated, "If you can't even surpass me, then there's no way you can become one of the Supreme 5 Staves." He also told Will about the time when the dwarf race, with an army of 10,000, instigated a rebellion, but a single magician suppressed it single-handedly. This, he said, was the truth of their world. One magic staff could defeat 10,000 warriors, so the sword could never surpass the staff. Yet even so, Will was determined to become one of the Supreme 5 Staves, something Eduardo found incomprehensible. What noble reason could possibly drive him? But Will's response was simple. He just wanted to keep a promise made to his childhood friend, to stand together at the highest peak and watch the sunset. Just then, the blonde threw Will his weapon. The moment the sword was drawn, Will's eyes hardened with resolve. Facing Eduardo's magic attack, he no longer dodged but cut it straight through. Eduardo recognized it as a demon-slaying sword. But how would that matter? If he attacked all at once, he doubted Will could evade. At that moment, Will's hands and feet trembled, and he wanted so badly to flee. But he couldn't afford to fail here. The next second, he found a breakthrough. Seeing this, Eduardo launched a fierce attack. Will refused to accept the teacher's words. A magician is also a brave warrior, and indeed, swords have long been able to rival staves. Under the intense light, Will slashed across the teacher's face. Eduardo kept his promise and awarded Will 5 credits. The principal applauded the fight. Will had deliberately jumped into the dense attack to conceal himself, then struck a deadly blow from above, breaking through the barrier. Such indomitable spirit was indeed valuable. The boy simply killed an Ice King as usual, but unexpectedly, this caught the attention of the world's strongest 5 staves. In their understanding, magic is the absolute power in this world. Yet the boy chose a different path. He perfected a sword technique so despised even by dogs. Once his sword was drawn, any monster in front of him would not survive more than 2.5 seconds. Just then, Will saw his childhood friend in the report, one of the 5 staves, the Ice Princess. As the youngest magical prodigy in history, she had created a new magic spell, her 12th innovation. Because of this, she needed a large number of frost cores. To help his childhood friend, Will immediately ran back to his dorm to change his equipment. Since the target was on the 4th level, he needed a tool made by his roommate. Once everything was ready, Will headed to the 4th floor of the dungeon, which was already crowded with students, as it was a mission issued by the genius girl. Even the school bully, Cyan, was there. After he had dispatched 7 ice infantry, only Cyan himself knew that this was not enough. Originally, Will had soloed monsters hundreds of times stronger than these. Seeing everyone gathering at the entrance of the 4th level, Will had to continue exploring deeper. But fate always comes so suddenly. Just as he landed, he found a girl in distress. He quickly killed 3 monsters to save her, so fast that the girl did not even realize what had happened. However, she vaguely recognized that the techniques Will used were not magic. After thanking Will, the girl introduced herself as Alice. From their conversation, Alice learned that Will was the rumored bookworm. Will didn't mind, though, as many in the school looked down on him as a non-magical person. Oddly, Alice addressed him respectfully as senior, making Will wonder if she didn't dislike him. However, Alice's reason was simple. How could she scorn someone who had helped her? She wanted to assist the Supreme 5 Staves and become a supporter of the sky herself. As Alice said, they had never seen the real sky. The sky covering the world was just a barrier, set up jointly by the 5 Staves to fend off external threats. If the barrier were ever broken, the world would be engulfed in darkness again. Thus, upon hearing about the mission, students actively collected cores, not only out of admiration for the 5 staves, but also to help support the sky. At that moment, Alice told Will that she had actually met Elfaria, his childhood friend. Just like the scene just now, she was alone in the dungeon facing a crisis. It was Elfaria who stepped in at the critical moment and rescued her. That was why she became enamored with Elfaria and would do anything for her. So, she volunteered to come here alone, but unfortunately, she couldn't find any ice infantry. Even using wide-range detection, she couldn't find any. It seemed they had already been hunted by others. However, Will, based on the movement traces left by the monsters, guessed that there was a formidable character ahead, because ordinary ice infantry would only leave behind ice fragments 0.5 to 1 meter thick, but the fragments here were several times larger. This confused Alice. Will clearly didn't use magic, so how could he know such things? Will pointed out that although magic was powerful, it was not absolute, especially in dungeons where experience and knowledge were key. After entering the cave, a giant monster attacked, but he easily dodged its assault. It turned out that the Ice King was a higher-class variety of ice infantry, unique to the 4th level. Alice felt this was not an opponent Will could handle, as getting close to the Ice King would result in being frozen, and defeating it would require long-range magic. However, Will assured her not to worry, as this wasn't his first time defeating such a creature. The tool he had borrowed from his roommate was specifically for dealing with the Ice King. Will used his agility and small stature to maneuver around the Ice King, perfectly binding the magical tool around every part of its body. The monster attempted to break free and launched a fierce counterattack, but Will had pinpointed its weakness. He activated the tool and killed it instantly. After killing the Ice King, a bunch of frost cores burst out, but Alice's expression changed upon witnessing this. It turned out that this was the capability of someone considered powerless, completely different from the rumors she had heard. Alice was actually directly under the highest 5 staves. They had specifically sent Alice to find strong individuals because the invaders from the sky were watching them from the other side of the barrier. Yet they lacked the strength and numbers to fight them. Therefore, they needed to discover more powerful individuals. Alice would report exactly what she had seen and even recommended that Will become a member of the tower, but this was rejected by both. Alf didn't want to add more of the inferior kind, but Zeo thought differently. Wiseman proposed to reconsider after the Grand Magic Festival. The two parted without agreement. Elfaria said she would wait here for Will. The man had never imagined that the universally acknowledged worst student in the academy, the one who couldn't use magic and was considered useless, would now dare to embarrass him, a favorite of the heavens, in public, infuriating him completely. He could never have foreseen that he would ultimately be defeated by Will, the so-called useless one. Shortly after defeating the Frost King, the Academy organized a comprehensive test to identify the strongest candidates and form a team to participate in the Grand Magic Festival. While other students demonstrated impressive talents, Will, the perpetual underachiever, couldn't even defeat a minor soldier, which drew ridicule from those around him, labeling him as a book-smart but practically useless student. During a practical class, while Will felt embarrassed by his poor performance, an even more embarrassing scene unfolded. The Academy's top geniuses easily knocked down a horde of monsters with minimal effort. Among them, Julius was particularly terrifying, freezing all targets with a single move. This spectacle made the onlookers gasp and regard these individuals as potential champions of the Grand Magic Festival. To qualify for the festival, one must form a team of 3 with a combined total of over 10,000 academic credits. Any of these geniuses alone surpassed that threshold, a fact that made Will feel particularly dismayed. This year was his last at the Academy, yet his credits were nowhere close to theirs, making even graduation uncertain, let alone further education. Will was troubled by this, but just then, Julius passed by and mocked him mercilessly, something Will had heard countless times over the years and had grown accustomed to. At lunch, Colette encouraged Will to demonstrate his skills at the Grand Magic Festival to clear his name. However, Will immediately refused, as he had participated once in his sophomore year and had caused chaos, which had cemented his reputation as the worst student. Colette had no choice but to drop the matter. That evening, Will went to work at a shop in the Dwarven district. Unlike others outside, the people here were quite kind to Will, as the dwarves themselves were marginalized by the world for their inability to use magic. Thus, Will held great respect for the dwarves and often worked in their shop to immerse himself in their culture. However, an unexpected incident occurred today. The other restaurants being full, Julius, the Academy's top talent, had no choice but to dine here. Upon entering, he immediately started to complain about the barbaric atmosphere of the place. Discovering that Will was working part-time here, he burst into mocking laughter, remarking that Will, a useless person, indeed matched well with the inferior barbarians. The surrounding dwarves instantly became uncomfortable at these words, but they dared not react physically. They were not natives of this world, but refugees who had fled here after being defeated by invaders from the skies. If they were to strike a local mage, they would have nowhere else to go, no matter the circumstances. Seeing that they didn't dare to retort, the mockery from Julius and his companions grew even more unrestrained. The trash talk became so unbearable that even Will couldn't stand it anymore. After enduring 2.5 hours of torment, Will finally lost his patience. He walked up to them and demanded they take back their derogatory statements. At this, Julius just laughed, and his two companions joined in with further insults. Unexpectedly, the next moment, Will knocked the two companions to the ground, which triggered Julius to retaliate. A chill filled the entire restaurant as Julius attacked Will. Ice spears continuously stabbed at Will, eventually pinning him against a wall. Julius thought such a vast disparity in power would make Will recognize his place. However, when he approached, he didn't see the submission in Will's eyes that he expected. This prompted Julius to change his plan of simply teaching Will a lesson there. He realized that only by crushing Will's dignity in front of everyone could he truly relieve his anger. With that, he invited Will to participate in the Grand Magic Festival, intending to brutally humiliate him there. Although knowing it was a trap, Will accepted the challenge because this time he was truly angry. Julius arrogantly made harsh threats, and Will set his own condition. If he won, Julius must apologize to the shop owner.